Welcome to the future. PBS Digital.
Niagara was always more than a natural wonder. The awesome falls were North America's first great symbol, an emblem for the vast, untamed continent. In time, they would become something quite different, a symbol of how we exploited the land and how we tried to preserve it, how we began to control nature, and how we learned to use it. So it is that the story of Niagara Falls is not a straightforward tale, but a story of rises and falls. It is a story of fear and affection, genius and lunacy, virtue and greed, romance and passion. Niagara, in short, describes us. Over and over again, the Falls tells all.
This program was made possible by the Niagara Parks Commission in Canada, presenting the authentic Falls experience to the world since 1885. Home to Niagara Falls, Great Gorge attractions, and War of 1812 historic sites. The Niagara Tourism and Convention Corporation, a non-profit organization committed to economic development for all of Niagara, USA. Based on tourism, meetings, conventions, and conferences. Ciminelli Real Estate Corporation, providing a wide variety of commercial real estate services in upstate New York, Florida, and southern Ontario. And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Niagara is a tale of ongoing sound and fury that begins with miles of quiet. The waters of 4 Great Lakes, 2/3 of the fresh water on the entire continent, flow gently along the Niagara River, marking the border between the U.S. and Canada. For 20 miles, a level grade until the mass of water suddenly divides, and 2 immense waterfalls plunge 20 stories down, diving into a roiling pool of water 200 feet deep.
This awesome raging cataract has today throughout the world given its name to turbulent waters even by men who've never seen it. In uncounted languages, in deference to its power, a torrent, a flood, anywhere becomes Niagara.
Now everybody has to look on the left-hand side because this is the view of all views in the world. The American Falls, which is flying by, and Goat Island. And,
the small falls to the right of the American Falls is called the Bridal Veil. To the extreme left of the Horseshoe Falls is Terrapin Point, through which passes the international borderline between the United States and Canada. Beneath us, the water plunges to a depth of 180 feet, or 55 meters. The water that flows over the falls comes from 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. From here, the water goes down the Niagara River to Lake Ontario.
The Falls of Niagara are in western New York and southern Ontario. There are really 3 waterfalls. The American Falls and the narrow Bridal Veil Falls are entirely in the United States. The giant Horseshoe Falls, more than a mile across, stretches between Canada and the U.S. For over 400 years, the falls have been an inspiration for passions and obsessions of all kinds.
Many composers have been inspired by water. I was inspired to write a piece about one of the greatest icons of American culture because my parents had their honeymoon here in 1954.
My mother made this collar for me in the early 1980s, and she made it for me in specific reference to Niagara Falls.
This is my home, my shrine to Niagara, my museum, you might say, of Niagara's past. And here I have before your eyes many of my creations to celebrate Niagara's past. For example, a statistical study I did of the accidents and suicides at Niagara Falls. The natural history of Niagara Falls. I produced a model here that shows how the falls moved 7 miles from when they began 12,000 years ago. As it moved and created its gorge, it paralleled human history.
The human story at Niagara began long before it was written down. It was home to the Haudenosaunee, the group of Native American tribes eventually known to the Europeans as the Iroquois.
For Native people, Niagara Falls is a very powerful place. It's the place where the grandfathers live underneath the falls, great powerful spirit beings that guide us and are very important to us. It's part of our beginning story or our creation story.
Over 300 years ago, Native American guides led the first European explorers to Niagara. The Europeans had a peculiar reaction. They were terrified.
This was a waterfall completely unlike anything that Europeans had either seen or imagined. So many of the early pictures have little figures right up on the brink who are gesticulating madly. Sometimes they're showing wonder, sometimes they're showing astonishment, sometimes they're cowering. Niagara Falls was terrifying. It's awe-inspiring. It is bigger than anyone can imagine. It was thought to represent God's power in nature. Many people talked about the voice of the falls as God's voice speaking to them. So that it was like God, terrible, terrifying, and yet full of promise, full of hope.
In the early years, because Niagara Falls was so distant and so inaccessible, almost nobody could get to it and could actually see it. So you could imagine it any way you wanted to. And people did imagine it as fabulous.
Niagara's fame spread quickly through dreamlike drawings and unlikely reports. In the early days, only a few Europeans actually saw the falls. It was no easy destination. As late as 1800, a journey from New England took weeks of bone-jarring carriage travel, followed by a hike of many days. Around the falls, wolves and rattlesnakes were plentiful. To get close to the cataracts, a visitor had to climb down by hanging onto scrawny vines, until a local entrepreneur built a spiral staircase down the gorge in 1815. The adventurous could now go exploring behind Horseshoe Falls, as they can today. But modern visitors take the elevator.
Good morning and welcome to Journey Behind the Falls. You are now descending 38 meters to 198 meters of man-made tunnels. They consist of 2 outdoor observation decks and 2 portholes, 1/3 of the way behind the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. Falls itself is 54 meters high and there's 154 million liters of water going over the falls each minute. This way, folks.
Okay, now we're coming up to the first bit of power chords based on Niagara Falls. Here it is. Niagara Falls.
the initial appeal of Niagara and its sublime meaning came from the fact that it represented untouched virgin wilderness. And of course, as settlement came to this area and moved westward in general, the whole area became built up, it was humanized, and in effect tamed.
The first visitors were content to simply gaze at the falls. But at the turn of the 19th century, a new idea came to Niagara, a vision of dollars and cents falling in an endless torrent.
In the early part of the 19th century, the hotel owners wanted people to stay longer. So they decided to create a distraction, a real exciting experience. They advertised in the papers, "Come and see a ship go over the falls loaded with wild creatures."
The hotel's owners sent the Michigan, a derelict merchant vessel decked out as a pirate ship, over the falls in September 1827. Aboard ship were 23 animals, including a bear and a buffalo. 20,000 people watched the animals die. The carnival of exploitation had begun.
Even in the early days, there was a big debate. Was Niagara Falls a place to come to think about humanity's puny place in the great universe? Or was Niagara Falls a place to have fun? Those two themes in Niagara's history. Is this for quiet contemplation of nature, or is this an amusement park? They have really characterized Niagara's history for a couple centuries.
If we look at Niagara Falls history, it's always grouped in centuries. We had the early Native Americans, and then we had the French coming in the 17th century, and the English in the 18th century. What happened in the 19th century here was railroads.
In the 1840s, two great rail lines, Canada's Great Western and the New York Central, chugged into Niagara and stopped on each side of the gorge. The Niagara River forms a watery Great Wall between Canada and the U.S. Below the falls, the river forms the Whirlpool Rapids and a deep, impassable chasm. For hundreds of miles, there was no way to go from one country to the other without a boat. Then the suspension bridge was invented. A bridge was designed for Niagara, the building set to begin, when a very basic problem became obvious.
The very first thing you do when you're building a suspension bridge is get the first line across. They tried a steamship to get the first line across, and that wouldn't work. They tried a bow and arrow, and that wasn't going to work. They tried a cannon. That didn't work. But a kite, the lowest tech they could come up with, saved the day.
The kite belonged to a 15-year-old, a local boy named Homan Walsh. In January 1848, he tried to fly his kite across the gorge, only to have it snag on the ice below. 8 days later, he tried again.
And there's prevailing wind out of Canada, out of the southwest. This is what Homan Walsh had the day he flew. He went to the Canadian side, flew his line over, and we caught it over here on this side. Just a few meters down the gorge. The next day, heavier line was fed over and heavier cable until it was a wire cable.
In March 1855, the Niagara Falls Suspension Bridge opened for business, the first in the world to carry railroad trains. Delighted visitors could now clatter across the gorge, 220 feet above the roaring rapids. Just gazing up at the falls wasn't enough anymore. The new breed of tourist wanted amusement, thrills, and even a few souvenirs.
Along the banks on both sides of the river, a century or so ago, you would have found Native women seated selling souvenirs, selling beaded items.
We see our ancestors sitting on the blanket at the falls. They brought their wares up here and all their beads, and they sat here and sewed all day long and selling at the same time. I marvel how they made a living. And I always remember the quote we were always told as children, and that was, you know, if you can do beadwork, you won't starve. Coming to Niagara Falls had that kind of exotic quality to it. It was part of something that was called the Grand Tour. And the confirmation of one's journey to Niagara Falls was to purchase a piece of beadwork, and the beadwork would have been labeled from the Tuscarora people.
A lot of people marveled at the sight of what they often called their first Indian just as much. It produced as magnificent a sensation as seeing the falls themselves.
In the 1860s, the 1890s, there was a great lament over the loss of the natural world. The symbol of that loss of innocence, that loss of the wilderness, became the native person. The romantic Indian, the exotic Indian, were played against the backdrop of the falls.
At Niagara Falls, we have a combination of the sacred and the profane. We have the waterfall itself, which people describe as in kind of religious terms or sacred terms. But then all around it, we have a circus. And this circus is not something new.
In 1859, Jean-Francois Gravelet, or Blondin as he liked to be called, came here and set up a wire across the gorge close to the falls, and all summer long did everything possible on that wire, backwards, frontwards, crawling.
People were stunned that you could even put a wire across in the first place, and it is an amazing engineering feat. And then to actually get on it and walk across on it was even more stunning.
That summer, the crowds were enormous, and they idolized Blondin. Out in Ontario farm country, a tight-wire walking medical student read about Blondin's exploits. To him, it sounded like a challenge. And so William Hunt came to Niagara and took a stage name of his own, the Great Farini.
The Great Farini came in 1860, the year after Blondin walked in 1859, and put his high wire up not too far from where we are right now, right where about where the Rainbow Bridge is right now. Blondin had put his wire up there the first year and then moved it downstream to the Whirlpool in the second year. And in 1860, in about June or July, they actually started competing. Blondin didn't like this very much because this was Blondin's show. Let's see how we would do this. Now, normally I would have a pole, so this would be a little bit different. So get up on my back. So Blondin decided that he was going to do something so extraordinary that he would knock Farini off the wire. You have to depend on me to correct this. So here we go, and I've got to keep my feet. So first he carried a man on his back. See how Farini got an even bigger man, but that man on his back carried him across on the wire. Right across. Then Blondin decided to take a stove across Niagara Falls. Walked halfway across and cooked eggs on his stove. So Farini, who turned out to be a very imaginative man, decided he had to do something even more extraordinary. So he went out and got himself a washing machine. Put the washing machine on his back, walked out here across Niagara Falls. When he was about halfway across, he took a rope, lowered the rope all the way down to the water with a bucket at the end, brought the water back up, and did his laundry. Well, one of the interesting things for somebody who isn't a wire walker, when they ask a question about what would it be like when you go out on a wire, and they say, what would it be like looking down? Well, the first thing is you don't look down. You have to look at the rope. You look out in front of yourself about 10 feet and you fixate on that rope.
Back in the 1800s, 11 wire walkers actually walked across the gorge of Niagara. All 11 wire walkers made it safely. The reason is they were professionals.
Niagara became home to these professionals. For a span of 40 years, they came, the kings and queens of midair, walking with blindfolds over their eyes, potato sacks encasing their bodies, their feet in peach baskets. It is against the law to put a rope across the gorge these days, and so wire walkers perform close to, but not over, the Niagara River.
Niagara Falls has held a long line, a long tradition of tightrope walkers and wire walkers throughout history. What I am attempting to do is carry on what they started.
Wire walkers are drawn to Niagara Falls because Niagara Falls is monumental. Everything about it is big, everything about it is spectacular. Wire walking is a 2,000-year-old art. People who do it are extraordinary athletes. The people who do it in most places in the world are revered as great artists. Whereas when you go over Niagara Falls in a barrel, you're taking a great chance. You get in the barrel, and nature just kind of takes you over the falls, and whatever happens, happens.
Not all of them have used barrels, but 16 people have deliberately gone over the Horseshoe Falls here in something or other, including 2 who've done it twice. And out of the 16, 11 have survived.
Jeffrey Petkovich and Peter DeBernardi went over together in 1989 to show young people that you could have fun without doing drugs. Yes. And when they took them out of the barrel below the falls, each man came out dressed only in his underwear, with a bottle or a can of beer in his hand. George Stathakis, he went over in his barrel with his pet turtle, Sonny Boy. He believed he could talk to the turtle, and he told reporters that if he didn't make it, that the turtle would later tell people why he had done this stunt and why he went over.
Now the music starts to descend, you know, like you're going over the falls. It's going down in pitch, like this. And all of a sudden you hit the bottom of the falls. You know, it's a huge splash.
They took the turtle, which survived, even though George didn't, and they held it at the museum there for years. It never said a thing.
The very first person to ride over the falls inside a barrel was Anna Edson Taylor. Her story should have been a cautionary tale.
She was 62 years old at the time, and was also next to being destitute. She needed money quickly. Or she put it, she needed to make some money honestly and quickly. And I guess we could add to that dangerously. She did go over the falls on October 24th, 1901 in a barrel, and survived, amazingly enough. Annie had hoped to make some money from her exploit of going over the falls in a barrel. The idea was that she and her barrel, or more exactly a replica of her barrel, would go on tour. And of course, admission fee would be charged for anyone who came out to hear her story. But it didn't work out. Unfortunately, Annie had no stage presence whatsoever, and most people had just dismissed her as a crackpot or a crazy person. She was reduced often to selling postcard pictures of herself in her barrel on street corners in Niagara Falls. Eventually, things got so bad that she had to go to a poorhouse.
Now we go back to the Niagara Falls power chords. There's a ship bell, like the Maid of the Mist. You hear that bell?
The Maid of the Mist is, in fact, a small fleet of boats that carries tourists through churning white water to the edge of the falls. It began operating in 1846 and may be the longest playing thrill ride on the continent.
No matter where you've worked before, nothing can really prepare you to taking a boat this close to a big waterfall. Although it is a bit of an optical illusion how close we go. We have quite a margin of safety here. We're a lot further back than it looks, but the people don't know that because the spray is so heavy, so it's quite a show for them. And most people will ask, where's all this water come from? Niagara Falls is one of the biggest waterfalls in the world that operates on a floodplain. Most other waterfalls are runoffs from mountains and tributaries to the rivers, where the Niagara River doesn't have any tributaries. It's just drainage from Lake Erie. The geography is so flat that it's just kind of mind-boggling where this water comes from.
This very flatness of the surrounding landscape made it hard for artists to render Niagara. Even the greatest 19th century painters struggled to depict the grand scale and intense energy of the falls.
Sometimes the early artists, in order to try to capture the vastness of the scene, would elongate the picture frame and make it more panoramic, make it broader than normal. Sometimes, though, to increase the impact, they decided to use a vertical format. They would get close up to the falls underneath it and show the impending torrent coming down upon them. Later artists began to come at different times of year, particularly in the winter, to try to get variety in different scenes. The dynamism, this constant motion, tremendous movement of the falls is dampened and quieted. There's still water moving, but much of it is frozen.
Winter or summer, natural wonders all wore a price tag at Niagara. By the late 1860s, you had to pay for almost every glimpse of the falls.
They charged 50 cents in 1850s to go on to Goat Island. At Prospect Point, there was an amusement park. You paid to get into the park, and you paid again to get up onto a platform to view the falls.
One of the businesses here was Table Rock House. And the scheme here was that visitors were very sweetly invited in to look around inside the building, to take a trip down to the base of the falls and so on, all for free, supposedly. But when you came to leave, then it was a different story. You had to pay a stiff fee before you were let out. If you refused to pay it, you were in big trouble. Some people were beaten up and thrown out who couldn't pay or wouldn't pay.
On both sides of the Niagara River, fences and factories lined the banks and blocked the view. Citizens in both countries were outraged. For 15 years, their protests swelled as they demanded that both nations tear down the factories, clear land, give the world a chance to see the falls. In 1885, they won. The two countries set aside 520 acres right by the cataracts. The fences came down. At last, the world-famous view was free for all.
Down below the falls is where you really hear them. The sound is overwhelming. When you're below the falls and you look up, you feel like an ant.
That's the closest you really get to being beside the falls. You know, you go up Cave of the Winds and you're completely drenched by the power of the falls. And people take off the raincoats, they get soaked, and they just feel that this power, this water has an unbelievable effect on them, and it's a real spiritual effect on them.
Come down here every year to build the Cave of the Winds trip. It's a series of wooden decks we build out into the white water over there. Try to get about 15 feet in front of the Bridal Veil Falls, as close as we can possibly build it every year.
1840, they started the tour into a cave behind the Bridal Veil Falls. 1920, that cave collapsed, and since then it's been only the walkways out to the front.
We can't use any power tools out here at all. We just have hammers and saws and do everything by hand, make all our cuts right out here on the wood, do all our measuring right out here on the rocks. This is a long tradition, building these trips. Over 80 years now, people have been coming down here. There's been a crew coming down here and doing it this exact same way. Hand tools, walking out on the rocks, and building the trip as close as they can possibly build it to the falls. So, yeah, I'm part of this tradition now.
People have always wanted to look at Niagara, but by the end of the 19th century, there were those who wanted to do something else at the falls, use it for power.
This looked like an infinite amount of power. And it was hard for pragmatic Americans to let it go by.
Hydroelectric power at Niagara would become a massive business that would actually change the world. But it began small. In 1882, the Niagara Canal Company used a single turbine to light up a grand total of 16 street lamps in Niagara Falls, New York. Townspeople celebrated with a torchlight parade.
It was the first hydroelectric power plant in the world, and that's what changed forever Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls was the birth of hydroelectric power.
The birth of power is a very good expression of the sense of optimism that existed around the turn of the century at Niagara Falls. There's a sense that it's kind of like a genie, like coming out of Aladdin's lamp. You can ask it to do anything, and it can accomplish anything.
New York State optimistically built an enormous tunnel to carry a torrent of water from above the falls through electric turbines and back into the gorge below. But the tunnel project would create far more electricity than the towns of Niagara Falls, New York and Ontario could use. Buffalo could use it, but there was no known way to send electricity even 1 mile, let alone 20. What could they do with all that power? This question became the root of discord between two of the greatest scientists who ever lived.
What we're going to hear next, we're going to have the timpani return. Now we're going to hear this electric theme, electric motive, the power motive, so to speak, of electricity generated by the falls. Now you hear the timpani, bum, 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 bum.
One combatant was America's preeminent inventor, the genius behind the light bulb, the phonograph, the movie camera, and thus the first motion pictures ever taken at Niagara Falls. Thomas Edison. His rival was an unknown and very odd Croatian refugee. Nikola Tesla said that just being near peaches gave him a fever. He said he heard signals from extraterrestrials. He said he had a magic solution to the problem of transmitting Niagara's power. Use another kind of electricity, a new type called alternating current.
At the time, this idea seemed just bizarre. Everybody else, Edison, all of the other experts suggested direct current. That's what existed in other places.
Tesla saw the flaw in direct current. It heated up cables dangerously. With alternating current, Tesla could step down the voltage when sending it over long distances, then step it up again at its destination. Edison paradoxically claimed that alternating current was more dangerous. To prove his point, he publicly electrocuted dogs and cats. Tesla gave a rival PR demonstration with himself as guinea pig. After carefully grounding himself, he sent large amounts of alternating current through his own body in public. In 1893, the Niagara Falls Power Company, desperate to make their tunnel work, chose Tesla to design the power station. Because so much water raged through the tunnel, Tesla created gigantic dynamos, 29 tons each. He put cables in place to transmit the power to Buffalo. Very few people believed the electricity could travel that far. So few, in fact, that on the night in 1896, when work was completed, the switch was pulled without fanfare or ceremony. To everyone's amazement, Buffalo's streetcars were running on Niagara power the next morning.
What happened at Niagara Falls in 1896 was that we had the very first long-distance transmission of electricity in history. And in a way, that was a much more significant fact than being able to generate electricity, because that allowed us to electrify the entire continent.
Nikola Tesla, of course, had the last laugh with Edison because the electricity could travel 20 miles away to Buffalo. If Edison's plant had been built, that wouldn't have happened here.
The electric tower at Buffalo's Pan American Exposition in 1901 signaled not only Tesla's triumph, but also Niagara's emergence as a source of vast power for North America.
The Niagara River, carrying the outflow from Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, and Erie, feeds the falls with a remarkably steady flow.
Soon plants on both sides of the falls sent Niagara electricity nearly everywhere in the Northeast.
Inevitably be tapped to serve the needs of industry and the welfare of mankind.
One of the greatest rock falls in Niagara's modern history, and certainly the most costly virtual.
In 1956, the rock wall above one power plant weakened and collapsed, destroying a power plant on the U.S. side of the falls.
Hundreds of tons of rock loosened by seepage thunder down the 220-foot cliff squarely upon the huge station which supplies a large portion of electrical current to upper New York State.
The collapse triggered the need for a new plant and the start of a new battle over Niagara Power. This time, the conflict was between the state of New York and the Tuscarora tribe. The state of New York meant Robert Moses, the man who had already covered the state with expressways, bridges, and public housing projects. Moses was arrogant and dictatorial, but he knew how to get things done.
Our objective is cheap power. Cheap power for industry, for cooperatives, for ultimate consumers, wherever they may be.
When he needed land for the new power plant and reservoir, he found it just downriver from the falls, on the Tuscarora Reservation. To the Tuscaroras, it was all too familiar a pattern.
They wanted to take almost half of the reservation. Indian nations, as a rule, are always a prime target for land acquisition, nationwide and in Canada.
When the Tuscaroras refused to sell their land, Moses said, "The braves are whooping it up." He offered more money. The tribe responded by posting no trespassing signs.
We tried to tell them that there was no dollar value to Indian land. But Robert Moses had in his mind that he was going to take this land regardless of treaties or anything else. He brought in the dozers, surveyors. He had a host of all police force. He had dogs, riot guns, tear gas. And we had an elderly lady take one of her grandchildren and lay down in front of the bulldozer. And she said, "Go ahead, you can spill my blood on this land because I'm not going to let you in here."
Moses took his case to the courts. On March 7, 1960, the U.S. Supreme Court gave the go-ahead. Moses got less than half of what he wanted, but as construction began, this was cold comfort to the Tuscaroras.
The federal government went along with Robert Moses in the state of New York, all except Justice Hugo Black, who said, "This is the blackest day in American history, when international treaties can just unabashedly be violated with utter disregard, totally, completely, to a people's treaty."
New York State got a much-needed boost to power production. The reservoir and plant are another example of the human ability to manipulate Niagara.
People ask, when do you shut off the falls? You know?
What do you tell them?
Around 10 o'clock.
The mighty waters of Niagara Falls pour some 9,000 cubic feet of water per second over this 165-foot precipice. Now, for the first time in history, U.S. Army engineers reduced this tremendous flow to a comparative trickle. Teams of engineers and state park workers remove unsightly logs and tree limbs.
We've inspected it, cleaned it, even blasted away dangerous outcroppings so that we might stand at its very brink.
Engineers are always on guard for signs of erosion, ready to dynamite away sections when cracks appear in the lip, a telltale mark of danger.
People come to Niagara Falls because they believe they're seeing something natural. But the falls has been completely manipulated. About 2/3 of the water is now going through pipes. It's not going over the falls anymore. So in a sense, when you look at the Niagara Falls, you're not looking at something natural. You're certainly not looking at what people looked at in the 19th century.
Now, if they wanted to, they could remove 85% of the water from above the falls, if they wanted to. But by treaty with Canada, the United States agreed in 1950 that they would only take out, at most, 75%.
The treaty specifies that approximately 45 million gallons per minute must be flowing over the falls by 8 o'clock in the morning during the tourist season.
They needed to reshape the bed of the Niagara River above the falls, and so they built cofferdams and deepened certain parts of the river above the falls and where the intakes were for the power plants.
To assist in this planning, a hydraulic model of the Niagara River was built at the Corps of Engineers Waterways Experiment Station. This comparison, showing the original conditions on the bottom portion of the picture and those of the final plan in the top portion, points up the improvements, particularly on the Goat Island plain.
During the fall, winter, and early spring, when you go to the falls, you're only seeing 25% of the water going over the falls that could be going over. I think we've diminished it. How can we say we haven't? When we control that flow, that river's flow, almost like a faucet in the bathtub. You want to increase it? Turn the knob. Decrease it? Turn the knob the other way. We reshaped the bed of the river around the brink of the falls in the 50s. So the water would spread out more evenly. It didn't look so nice with water going more over the center than the sides. Well, that happened a lot in the history of the falls. It wasn't always the way we think it should look. How do we think the Grand Canyon should look? Yosemite, should we tamper with them too?
You might say that now what we see is a calculated sublime, something that's been measured. Someone has sat in some office somewhere and decided how much water does it take to give us the sense of wonder and power that this place is still supposed to be all about.
To some, the grand pageant of nature seemed to cry out for human enhancement. Even in 1860, people were using flares to light up the falls. By 1924, the show was permanent. 24 giant carbon arc lamps beamed on the falls every night.
We're probably about 10 times stronger now than we were back there in 1924. The wattage on these is 4,000 per bulb, and the candle power approximately 500 million per bulb. We didn't have color changers back then. When you get about maybe 25, 35,000 people down there on a good summer night, it gives you a little feeling of power.
Ironically, in the 19th century, people used to love to come to see the falls under moonlight. We would have extra large crowds there. They said it was a wonderful sight. And today you can never see the falls under moonlight because there's so many electric lights flooding it constantly. A committee about lighting asked me about this, said, have any suggestions? I said, yes, have a dark night. Once a month, all the lights out, when there's a full moon.
The lights were on for good for the falls. Science had reinvented Niagara. It was now a source of great power.
Flow on you, mighty Niagara, your rapid surge and swell. Your waters pound and cascade down to where the rainbow dwells. Mist showers above you, and the honeymooners love you.
But the basic meaning of the falls continued to change. For most 20th century people, Niagara meant romance.
These people say, oh, honeymooners from Italy.
In the 20th century, Niagara Falls started acquiring a more overtly sexual place in popular culture. There are, film references. Think of the line from the Shuffle Off to Buffalo song. To Niagara in a sleeper, there's no honeymoon that's cheaper, and the train goes slow.
We're gonna shovel off to Buffalo. Someday the stork may pay a visit and leave a little souvenir. Just a little cute, what is it? But we'll discuss that later, dear.
People for over 100 years, actually 150 years, have come here on their honeymoons. The thought is there must be some sexual energy that's here. I don't know, I once heard it said that there really wasn't anything else to do when you came here.
Oh, we'll shuffle, and we'll shuffle. Shuffle off to Buffalo. That's it.
Niagara Falls, 2 words meaning honeymoon, celebrates, with a wedding of course, its 50th anniversary as the blissful city of newlyweds. 100 cheer Shirley Newhouse and James McKay, the city's honeymoon couple of the year. But yesteryear isn't forgotten. Here's Mr. and Mrs. W. Clark, honeymooners here 50 years ago. The bride and groom of 54 depart in a Surrey for an undisclosed location, followed by bride and groom of 1904. And of course, they drive to the falls, timeless in majesty, timeless perhaps as their love.
We are gathered here to celebrate one of life's greatest moments. Gary, repeat after me and repeat it to your lovely bride. I, Gary,
I, Daryl,
take you, Brenda,
to be my wife,
to laugh with you in joy,
to laugh with you in joy,
to grieve with you in sorrow,
not too much, to grieve with you in sorrow,
to grow with you in love,
to grow with you in love,
wherever life may take us. We're at the Two Hearts Wedding Chapel in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada, of course. The building we're standing in used to be a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Niagara Falls! We've been here at this location for 5 years now, and every year it's getting busier and busier. Last year I did about 820, maybe 830 weddings, and I already know this year has doubled. We have couples that get married in the helicopter, in an airplane, on Maid of the Mist. They're starting to get very unusual with their weddings. I've done the jet skis down in Niagara-on-the-Lake.
Niagara Falls is, you know, the honeymoon capital of the world.
That's true.
So we're falling in line.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's beautiful.
A few years ago, I did hockey teams. They were on opposing hockey teams. So they came in their hockey uniform, and they asked me to wear a ref shirt, so I had to wear a ref shirt. Everybody wants to come to Niagara Falls. Maybe it goes back to the falls and the romance and the way you feel with the falls flowing. I don't know what Niagara Falls does to people, but it does it.
Niagara provokes powerful passions and some strangely elemental theories. Could it be that negative ions in the water affect the human brain?
When you're near a body of water, the ions are closer together in the atmosphere. So you tend to feel better when you're, say, at the beach or near a waterfall.
Well, at the bar, all the border guards are having a ball, newlyweds next door. They're knocking down the walls. These border water towns, they always make me think of you. Well, if you would come and see me in this tourist town, I'd love you like the waterfall that's crashing down. I said, pull yourself together, girl, help me get a message through. Well, oh, Niagara, please don't make me go.
Ions are little chemical.
I can't tell you what a negative ion is. I'm a musician.
Negative ions are these wet ions. They're atoms that have been negatively charged in the process of creating the mist.
You think it's true?
Who knows?
I'm a chemist, and I know what a negative ion is. A negative ion, or O2 minus, is actually created by oxygen, O2, picking up a single extra electron through cosmic rays, electromagnetic waves, the sun, lightning, and even waterfalls. If you look in the internet, you'll find many uses for these negative ions. Besides being an aphrodisiac, it's supposed to help with migraines, decrease stress and fatigue. The truth of the matter is, it's a complete and utter hoax. Negative ions are actually harmful for us to certain levels. We actually create them in our body naturally. However, in such a small amount, our body can actually get rid of them. So it seems that the fall's natural beauty is what's going to attract people and not the chemistry in the air.
You know, it's hard to forget that I'm the reason you cry. Those power lines are buzzing like my foolish pride. There's a wall of white water, but it only makes a body blue. Well, I'm hanging on tight with all the strength I can find. Forgive me half a minute, I got half a mind. I'm gonna jump into a barrel and go over these falls for you.
I love those negative ions.
One of the key modern images of the falls is in the famous Marilyn Monroe movie from 1952 called Niagara, where there's roaring passions, uncontainable, even by nature, whatever. And I think that recaptured the sense of power, but it explicitly sexualized it. And of course, it was a movie. It was modern entertainment, modern spectacle.
Niagara Falls is depicted as a place of danger where one might fall into sin of some kind. This has a long history at Niagara Falls. People have often talked about passion, about some force of nature within us that we can't control, which might come bursting out. Niagara Falls is a dangerous place. People die here. Death is always on people's minds at Niagara Falls. Looking at the river, you can tell that if you step into it, it will kill you.
Okay, here's the haunted house music now, okay? So you hear the whole tone scales and the film noir. What inspires me is all the different people that come here. Some are coming here to look at the falls, which is amazing. Others are coming simply to go to some of the gaudiest, most kitschy, bizarre things you could imagine. You have the sublime, which is this beautiful nature. At the same time, you have this bizarre culture which has grown around it.
I love Niagara Falls. What I love about it is that process of reinvention, how you can take a whole bunch of water falling over rocks and make it do so many different things. Niagara Falls has been an icon for 2 centuries. How many places in North America can we say that about?
It's not an object, it's a process. It's a bunch of water falling over this cliff, which is carving this enormous gorge here. And it's going to keep doing that, and it's going to keep going into the future. However, we could stop it. We could stop it completely if we wanted to. And so to me, the falls represents a series of choices.
For the Haudenosaunee, this is a very powerful place that needs to be respected. It's a source of immense power, and I think that today people don't have respect for this place and what it truly represents, and that it's been captured by an imaginary which is not ours. And so today it's carnivalesque. It continues to be seen as a tourist destination instead of as an incredibly powerful, and some might suggest spiritual place.
Of course, the falls that we see today is practically nothing like the falls that the first explorers saw or that the Native Americans experienced in their lives. It's paved, it's protected, most of the water is diverted. But it's still the water and the rock. It's been from the beginning a symbol of nature and the natural wonders of what was the new world, the new continent. I think it does still matter, and that's still the appeal of it. That's what people ultimately come here for. They want to see the water. They want to see the rock over which it tumbles. They want to feel the breeze. They want to feel the mist. They want to see the rainbow.
Xylophone and glockenspiel. Higher. Here's the power chord.
Niagara Falls is available on videocassette or DVD. The companion book to the program is also available. To order, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS.
This program was made possible by the Niagara Parks Commission in Canada, presenting the authentic Falls experience to the world since 1885. Home to Niagara Falls, Great Gorge attractions, and War of 1812 historic sites. The Niagara Tourism and Convention Corporation, a non-profit organization committed to economic development for all of Niagara, USA, based on tourism, meetings, conventions, and conferences. Ciminelli Real Estate Corporation, providing a wide variety of commercial real estate services in upstate New York, Florida, and southern Ontario. And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
We are PBS.